So I'll stop sharing now. You can stay on the gallery view or the speaker view. If you just want to see me, then up in the top right in the view button, there's a speaker view. If you want to see everybody and scroll around, then there's a gallery view. Either way, if you stay muted unless you need to ask a question, I'll appreciate that very much. If you're looking at me, you'll see a couple of prints behind me. I just stuck them up on my couch to make the beige wall a little more interesting, from two good friends of mine, spiritual topics. The Soul's Probation, one of the mystery drama plays that Rudolf Steiner produced, was doing a North American tour, and this is a poster from it. And on the other side is an Inuit print by a famous Inuit artist, and it's entitled "The Thunderbird of Wisdom." I was told I have to say it that way. Okay, so, oops, now let me pull up something that you don't see, which tells me what I'm talking about tonight. Very good. Well, we've already acknowledged Valentine's Day, and my son and sometime soon to be daughter-in-law made that quite special for me. But the work we're doing tonight could very well lead you to learn something quite new about your significant other. Karma works in groups, and if you have a significant other, whether alive or not, whether you're still in the same building or not, that person has a relationship to you that probably spans more than a lifetime. So Valentine's Day can be enhanced a bit by this wonderful spiritual efforts that we may decide to undergo. I will be posting recordings as quickly as I can, but so far there's only one. So you haven't missed anything if you're looking for it. We have in this workshop invited a number of serious anthroposophists from the Toronto branch to speak. You've experienced Rob McKay, and last weekend, Yuri Kuramtali. We have two more anthroposophists, two more people after me, and then a wonderful return visit from Rob McKay again. I think that that's a valuable thing, especially for those of you who are new to anthroposophy, because you're going to see a lot of personalities. All of us claim to be serious anthroposophists. We're certainly not cut from the same cloth. I think you've had 3 weeks of wonderfully heartfelt presentations from Rob and Yuri. Those people really have the strong social forces. They're very powerful in those areas. I'm not. I'm quite a solitary person. I think for a living. I've been a scientist, a computer scientist for almost 40 years. So that's what I do with my spare time. So tonight you're going to see a presentation that has a lot of me talking. I hope that that's tolerable for you. This topic, karma and reincarnation, is so big that I can't pretend to present the anthroposophical perspective on it in 1 hour. It's not even possible. I've taught in the past anthroposophical topics, and a few years ago I created a 7-week course on karma. Every week for 2.5 hours, just talking about karma. And I don't feel like in any way I began to exhaust the material that Rudolf Steiner has given us. There's so much material. What I hope tonight is that I can interest you enough in one aspect or another that you will choose to pursue it yourself. And being rather academically oriented, I assure you that I will give you with my video all of the references to everything I say. That's a bit extreme, but I will give you all the main lectures that encompass the material that I'm bringing. I'm not making any of this up. So if Rudolf Steiner said something, I'll give you a link to it. In the first week, Rob talked about a few meditations. So one that I'd like to highlight is the gratitude meditation. That plays directly into tonight. We'll get to that in a moment, or in a little while, when I talk about the actual karma meditations and the series of them, which I will also give you the link to. The gratitude meditation is the first one of those particular focus meditations. And last week, Yuri had an exercise in which we were to see ourselves as strangers. Perfect. That's all about trying to get a perspective on your karma and the people you know and care about. It's very difficult to do that. If you can't step away from the emotional connections, it will be impossible to do that in a truly accurate way. You have to develop the ability to see yourself as a stranger. We can do that with exercises that Steiner gave us. We can also do that with an exercise that Yuri gave us. If you're inclined to be a writer, then you're already on the right track. Go right ahead. Write in the third person. Practice that perspective. So let's start with the concepts of reincarnation and karma. Ancient concepts. They've been around as long as human history records anything related to religion. There are some differences in the modern perspective that Rudolf Steiner is bringing to this topic from the ancient perspectives, many of which have gone through a lot of changes. Some could even say devolved from the original teachings. So in some versions of Hinduism, the fear is that if you don't do a good job, you could reincarnate into an insect or an animal. Anthroposophical research does not support that at all. From the anthroposophical perspective, this is a human incarnation. We have reached the level of a human being. We will not descend into the lower kingdoms as a result of our incarnations, good, bad, indifferent. Another significant change which shows up in Hinduism, but even more clearly in Buddhism, is the concept of the wheel of karma. And in Buddhism, many of the sects or versions of Buddhism implore you to try to get off the wheel of karma. The goal is to stop incarnating. The goal is to free yourself from this wheel of karma. But in the anthroposophical perspective, it's very clear that there's a purpose to karma, and that purpose is human evolution, or on the individual level, metamorphosis, change, becoming better, becoming more, becoming purer, many adjectives that we can add to the picture. But the process of reincarnation and karma is a forward-moving process, not something that we're trying to escape, something that we're trying to accomplish. So I'd like to go into some details about how anthroposophy and the research, particularly of Rudolf Steiner, but I will mention another name or two, have given us insight into how karma and reincarnation work. So Rudolf Steiner, a extremely accomplished initiate, researched questions in the spiritual world and brought answers to us and lectured on these things. He declared a number of times that he would not lecture on something that he hadn't learned or experienced himself. So he didn't lecture from historical context. He didn't say something that someone else said must be true because it makes sense. He only lectured on things that his clairvoyant research was able to discern. So take that as you will. He also, of course, gave us many methods of becoming clairvoyant and allowing us to do this research ourselves. And I'll mention a couple of examples of that tonight. So we don't have to take Rudolf Steiner on faith, and he tells us quite clearly, don't do that. But we can listen and see what he has to say and see if it develops a feeling of truth. If it does, then it probably will help you to move in your own path towards recognizing spiritual indications. So Rudolf Steiner answered the question, have we always incarnated? Will we reincarnate forever? Is this wheel endless? He said no, quite clearly, quite specifically, he said. Reincarnation for human beings began in Lemuria. So I don't know if all of you know the cosmology of Earth and the pre-Earth developments, and I won't go into that tonight, but if you do, you know Lemuria is two great epochs before our present epoch, and that is when humans began incarnating, and that is when individual karma began. Before that, we didn't have individuality and we didn't have karma. Will it end? Yes, it will. It will end in what he calls the sixth great epoch. So there's a period of time during which we engage in reincarnation and we work on our karma. And then after that, we don't have that opportunity. So this is, I hope you'll see as I speak, an opportunity for us to work through our karma and to develop in a way that we haven't always had and won't always have. So I want to emphasize that everything in the study of karma is individual. It's not easy to say generalizations about karma, like all people will do this if they did that in their last life. Nothing like that is a safe statement to make, all people. Everyone's karma is their own karma. Your karma is your karma only. So something that applies to an example or an anecdote that Steiner gives us may in some way apply to you, or it may not. It really is a task for each of us to explore our karma. Someone as accomplished a clairvoyant as Steiner could research other people and give what I consider to be an authoritative description of their karmic path. But that's not an amateur undertaking. That's a very advanced capacity. So I will give you some examples of things that he has been able to generalize about, but then in many places he gives exceptions to that. So don't take everything too seriously as an exact statement. In fact, he was asked by the workmen of the Goetheanum, the main building for Anthroposophy in Switzerland, the workers of the first Goetheanum who were building it, asked about a theater fire. There was a fire in which many people died. Did they all die in that theater fire because they had the same karma? They all died at the same time in the same place. Why did they all die in that theater fire? And Steiner answered in a fair bit of detail. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm doing it only from memory. He gave many examples of how a group of people could undergo an experience, in this case, an extremely significant experience of dying in a fire for a whole variety of reasons. It could be that someone needed to die at that age because their family needed to deal with that death. It could be that someone needed to die at that place because in the past they had done something that incurred a debt that could be paid off by dying in that fire and not continuing with their life's path. It could be that someone died in that fire, perhaps even a group of people, to come back in the next life as a group of people with a common event in their past. They could recognize each other and work together. There are so many explanations for a karmic event, even such a significant and mass event as a theater fire. So that's just a hint of what Steiner has to say about the individuality, the uniqueness of each person's karma. But to go to some generalizations, Steiner did say that at minimum, we need to incarnate in every major cultural age. So a cultural age is now. The previous cultural age was the Roman Greek cultural age. The one before that, the Egyptian, Chaldean, Mesopotamian, Hebraic cultural age. The one before that, ancient Persian, and before that, ancient Indian. We need to incarnate in every one of those cultural ages because the earth changes. And a cultural age during our cycle of the earth is 2160 years. Well, we need to incarnate every cultural age, but we also need to incarnate in every cultural age twice because we have a very different experience as a man and as a woman. We need to incarnate in every cultural age as a male and every cultural age as a female. So you could say that on average and at minimum, we need to incarnate about every 1,000 years. That's a long time. So we're not incarnating the moment we die. That's not typical. That's not the way that Steiner was researching people's incarnations. But it's not impossible that a person, and not even unlikely, that a person could incarnate more often than that. There are reasons that we need to come back. There are benefits to coming back. It doesn't mean that we can casually choose, and I'll get into that in a minute, planning your incarnation. But the idea at a minimum, we would be incarnating about every 1,000 years. There's a question that, as a mathematician, never bothered me, but it bothers a lot of people about incarnation. 100 years ago, we had 2 billion people. Now we have 6 billion people. Where did all those people come from? Were those souls just created out of nothing? No, not at all. If we assume that this moment in time, a lot of us need to be on the earth, incarnated, well, then we have 6 billion or whatever our current number is of people incarnated, but still there are more. So if all of us wanted to incarnate every 100 years, we would need to maintain the population, at least 6 billion, perhaps twice that for all I know. I don't know how many people are discarnate. So if we assume that there are lots of people, lots of souls, incarnated and not incarnated, the time when we incarnate slowly, we can have a smaller population because we don't need to come back as often. The times when it's really special, and there are some descriptions of why the late 1900s were very special. Anthroposophical description of the return of Christ in the etheric. We all need to be here. When I'm talking to people in person, I often say, why is it so busy right now? Well, it's because we all wanted to come back during the age of the smartphone. Well, it's a pretty exciting age. There's a lot going on. There's many things that we could talk about in esoteric history that I'm not going to touch on at all. But this clearly is a time when so many of us wanted to be incarnated. However, there are groups. So you are part of a family, you have friends, you have associates at work, you have people that you get to know during your life. And as you do karmic research, some of these people will continue to show up in your other lives. And that is because we incarnate in groups. We incarnate in what you could call cohorts. So there's a group of us incarnated now, and most of us will incarnate together. Not the whole world, I don't know the whole world, but the group of people that I know, many of them will incarnate together again, because we have issues, obligations, items that we can assist with related to the people that we know now. So we have to incarnate together. How can that happen? How can such a complex web of people still incarnate in groups? It seems unimaginably complicated. Clearly we have some help. There isn't just a human being saying, your turn, your turn. No, I need 3 of you. Come next, come through the turnstile. Nothing like that. There's a lot going on. Just before I get into how that could work, I want to talk briefly about one of those cohorts, or even bigger than a cohort, a stream. Steiner talks about groups of people that have a similar task or mission. Groups of people that go through a sequence over and over of incarnations to accomplish a task. And he tells us that in the group of anthroposophists that were around him in the early 1900s, and continuing on in our society and in our group, our organization, there are 2 groups or 2 streams that are really important. One is the Aristotelians, a group of people that have incarnated time after time with people who are gathered around Aristotle. Aristotle, the famous Greek thinker. And a second group who are, and this sounds strange because they're so close together in time, a second group who are gathered around the Greek thinker Plato. So Platonists and Aristotelians are 2 separate streams. And Steiner gives us a series of lectures, and I'll give you some links to it when I post the annotations. He gives us a series of lectures that help us to understand how the Platonists and the Aristotelians cooperated and accomplished different things as they were developing their own capacities and forces. I won't go into that now. Any of you who've researched it will probably be able to place yourselves in one of these 2 groups. It doesn't mean that the whole world is one of these 2 groups, but anyone who's a serious student of anthroposophy may have the history that is easily placed in the Platonists or the Aristotelians. I'm easily placed as a rather unbalanced Aristotelian. Our goal is, Steiner tells us, to come together now. This is our goal during this time, is for the Platonists and the Aristotelians to incarnate at the same time and cooperate. And I can tell you that's not easy. Platonists are very different from me. I'll give you 2 examples. Steiner said that the Platonists, when he would speak, he'd have an audience of both types. And it would be easy to see because he would say, this is what needs to be done. And the Platonists would stand up and rush off and do it, even before they had any idea what they were doing. And the Aristotelians would nod and understand quite deeply what Steiner said and do nothing. That was the difference between the Platonists and the Aristotelians in his audience. I'll give you a more mundane example. If you're a fan of jigsaw puzzles, and you do the jigsaw puzzle. I told you I'm pretty unbalanced, so I'll tell you how I do it in a minute. If you do the jigsaw puzzle, maybe like my sisters, you will study the box and decide if this is an attractive puzzle. And then if it is an attractive puzzle, you'll commit yourself to doing it. You'll place the box up in front of you. You'll start assembling your pieces. Every time you have an interesting piece, you'll look up at the box and say, oh, it goes here, it goes there, etc., etc. Well, I suggest to you that that's a Platonist's way of building a puzzle. My way is to look at the box, decide to buy it, and never look at the cover again. I turn it upside down. I never look at the cover again. It takes me probably 10 times as long as you, but I finish that puzzle. When I'm finished, I know the details. I did a Van Gogh puzzle, and all of those swirls, all 7 of them, looked the same as I was assembling them. But when I was finished, I knew where every one of those swirls went. So there's a Platonist or a rather extreme Aristotelian approach to making a puzzle. Why is that important? Because if you understand how different and legitimately different people are and what their strengths are, you can come together. I can respect people like Yuri and Rob who have a great social art while I'm hiding in my cottage out 10 kilometers from the next person. I can work together with these people and appreciate their strengths, and they can put up with me. So it's a valuable thing, especially if you really are part of our Anthroposophical group and you really are here to accomplish what some people call culmination of the 2 streams. We need to work together. So where does this come from? A very quick and simplified description. Where does my karma come from? I'm dealing with karma now. I keep glancing at my clock to make sure. I'll even give you a couple of anecdotes at the end or near the end, one of which is how my study of anthroposophy saved my life. Okay, so that's coming. So where did this karma come from? Everyone has their own karma. Some of you will recognize it now and then, but all the time it's playing its part. It's unraveling in your life. Steiner tells us that after we die and we work through our present life, through the initial shining of the light and the whole panorama of our life spread out before us, and then the 1/3 of our life's length period of time of Kamaloka, when we work through all of our experiences from the other person's point of view. After that happens, then we begin working with the higher beings, the angels, all the way up the hierarchies, to assemble our next life. What we've learned from this life and what we then becomes accessible to us from our past lives, tasks that need to be completed, strengths that we have completed or have not completed, imbalances, things that we really are too extreme. We need a balance of something else. All of those aspects of becoming a better human being, a more capable and more powerful functioning human being. All of those things are assembled, and some of them can be accomplished in one life, the next life. The higher beings work with us. Now, typically, we work for a long period of time on this. The typical 1,000 years is useful because we are not only working on our ultimate incarnation, whenever that will be, but we're working to develop that incarnation so that the body we incarnate into will be helpful, appropriate. Well, you can't just make a body at the last minute. So we are actually working with the higher beings on our ancestry of the next life. The parents of that body we're going to incarnate into, the parents of the parents, the great-grandparents. We need to, and not us because we're not wise enough, but with the cooperation of the higher beings, nudge all of those people in a way that ultimately results in something useful for our next incarnation. Such a massive and again, incredibly complex concept that all of these things are happening to people who have their own karma. So part of your karma is to prepare for a child that may be generations ahead. How about that? There's a new aspect of karma. My son just announced his engagement. Well, there it is. There's the next link. I managed to make him. Well, he's got to make the next one and the next one. And whatever I did to make him is going to pay off in the next one and the next one. If I did a good job of it, I'm not quite sure. So there's an aspect of karma that we don't often hear. Interestingly, the natives in North America speak of the 7 generations back, and they can also conceive of the 7 generations ahead and what they owe to those generations of maintaining the earth. So it's a very good perspective to add to that. I'm not going to dwell on this. As I said, I'm teasing you all night. I'm just telling you a little bit and hoping that you will dive into my annotated bibliography and find the piece that caught your attention. So let's take an example from Steiner. Oh, I'll show you something. So this is the series of books called Karmic Relationships. At the end of Steiner's life, he began an incredibly productive and incredibly intensive series of lectures. He was racing around Europe, sometimes lecturing twice a day. And he was lecturing in the last part of his life on karma. It was very important to him that Anthroposophy, spiritual science, bring a new concept of karma. And so those books, 8 of them, are filled with examples. There are some principles described, but a lot of examples. Steiner researched people and then described their karmic history in these lectures. Enormous. I wish I could say I've read those 7 times. I haven't. There's so much material there. I will never begin to master it. Before that time, he was speaking on so many subjects, including karma and reincarnation. But then he became focused incredibly. Not that he was doing nothing else. He also invented biodynamics during this time, but he was focused on karma and reincarnation and how important it is for the modern man to have a modern concept of karma. So one example, there was a philosopher in his time. I believe it was current, but perhaps a little bit before his time. Edward von Hartmann. And that philosopher really caught Steiner's attention. He was such a vigorous German philosopher who came out with statements that were so strong and so heart-filled with the folk soul of the German. Steiner said, this is a fascinating man. I will research his karma and find out where he came from. So he started with the biography of von Hartmann. Von Hartmann was a philosopher. He said at that point, at the beginning, he couldn't find the previous incarnations of von Hartmann, a philosopher. That told him nothing. He researched the biography further. This is just like typical research that we could do, going to a library or now going to Wikipedia, and found that von Hartmann had initially been a Prussian soldier. He was a soldier, very accomplished. He became an officer, a successful soldier. And then later he was a philosopher. What a strange change. In his early years as a young and middle-aged man, he was a very successful soldier. He had no time, no obvious interest in philosophy. And then something happened. As a soldier, he developed a serious knee affliction. He couldn't walk. He can't be a soldier anymore. He can't be on the battlefield. He's laid up in his home, a fairly well-to-do home, sitting with his leg up, moving nowhere. He begins to read. He turns into a very important and prolific philosopher. So Steiner said that was the moment in von Hartmann's current life that was an incredibly important karmic moment. The knee injury. Where did that come from? Can Steiner, using his disciplined clairvoyance, use that to track the von Hartmann individuality back? The knee injury. He used that in a way that he doesn't fully describe, and I'm sure that we aren't capable of fully accomplishing, to track back to the previous incarnation of von Hartmann, in which he was a soldier again. He was a soldier during the Crusades. And that soldier had a karmic moment. The soldier, while he was fighting on the battlefield, he's fighting an individual. He was really a powerful soldier and perhaps about to defeat that individual on the enemy side, suddenly had a sunstroke. He fell and was defeated by his opponent. He was killed by his opponent because of this sunstroke. So there's an event, a bit like a knee event. The knee affliction changed von Hartmann's life totally. This soldier in the Crusades had a sunstroke event in his head and fell and was defeated by a particular enemy. So Steiner now has the connection, and he takes it back one more step. And he finds in a fairly ancient civilization, he doesn't name the civilization, this same individual. And in this individual, in this incarnation, he's a remarkably intelligent individual. He's in charge of many people. He's a I'm not sure how to describe it, but let's say he's a work boss. And there are many people that are under his control. But in particular, there was one individual that he continually persecuted. For whatever reason, he persecuted that person over and over relentlessly. The person had no recourse, couldn't possibly stand up to this remarkably intelligent, important, and powerful person in this ancient civilization. The persecuted individual had a terrible life. Now Steiner can go back. The persecuted individual was von Hartmann's opponent on the Crusades battlefield. He was the opponent that the soldier was fighting when the soldier had a sunstroke. Von Hartmann, the soldier, had a sunstroke. The individual who could never stand up to him in the ancient civilization defeated him at that moment. So we see a bit of suggestion that there's the karma of the persecuted individual playing out in this moment of sunstroke. But we also are capable, as you will need to read much more to get this context, but I'll give it to you in a summary. A movement of events from the head to the body. So in the ancient civilization, the remarkably intelligent work boss is reincarnated as a soldier, not an intelligent person, but a strong in the body person. The intelligence from the head leads to a very capable body in the next incarnation. Steiner tells us that this is a repeatable and a realistic pattern to look for. That soldier has a head injury, a sunstroke. And then in the next incarnation, when he has an injury, it's in the body again, not in the head. It moves to the knee. That incarnation of von Hartmann himself is very clear. He starts as an able-bodied soldier and then becomes a clear-headed philosopher after the injury. So that kind of movement from head to body and body to head is something to be expected. I pride myself on being a thinker. Well, it's quite likely that in my next incarnation, I might be a good runner rather than a good thinker. These things move back and forth. We're developing our capacities in all of our aspects, not just the one that we recognize in this life. So that's a pretty confusing thing that I'm giving so little attention that I don't expect you to be able to follow it. But if you wish to, the von Hartmann example is very well described in one lecture, and I will put that in my notes. Very quickly, one more. And this one, I won't give you all the details. It's more interesting how Steiner researched it. He said this is a very common situation if you want to research something for another person and you're trying to follow them back. It's quite different if you're doing your own karmic research. Who was I and who was around me? That's a very personal thing. But if you try to accomplish this further abstracted karmic research like Steiner is capable of, this example of Hermann Grimm is illustrative. Hermann Grimm, I think cousin of the famous Grimm brothers, was, you could almost say, a disciple of Emerson. When he read Emerson's book, he completely changed his writing style and followed Emerson around as a fan and a compatriot, even though they're in different countries and continents. So when Steiner wanted to see the past incarnation of Hermann Grimm, he worked with Hermann Grimm and could find nothing. He said it was like there were 1,000 possibilities, none of them more likely than the other. What he needed to do was to look at the biography of Hermann Grimm and hear about, or perhaps he could even see, because he could do a lot of clairvoyant reading of the Akashic records, but in some way he was able to imagine the gesture of Hermann Grimm opening the book of Emerson. The first time he opened that book, there was a particular gesture that Hermann Grimm used. Now, exactly what that is, it's not clear, but Steiner said that gesture allowed him to make a connection to the previous two incarnations. And they immediately included Emerson in those previous two incarnations. So he used the gesture of Emerson to work backwards. And the gesture of Emerson was quite different. When Emerson was writing, apparently, he had tables in his writing room with books scattered around like a graduate student. The books are open and Emerson would walk among them and stop and read a passage and walk among them. He was constantly moving. That's how he thought and studied and wrote, by walking among the open books. So those two gestures allowed Steiner to work backwards and find the previous incarnation of Hermann Grimm as Countess Beatrix, and her daughter Matilda was Emerson. And the previous incarnation before that of Pliny the Younger, and contemporary to him, the Roman official, Tacitus. So interesting to me here is the idea, which he emphasized many other times, of how important gesture is. He said there are some people who won't do anything before they do this. First, you cross your arms, then you decide to do something. There are other people that will charge off and do something. There are people like me who will play with their mustache while they're thinking. Those kind of gestures may be helpful if you're tracking the karmic relationships of a person and their previous incarnations. Okay, so I will quickly go to a couple of anecdotes and then we'll do some exercises. These are personal anecdotes, two karmic experiences that I've had. So one is quite typical and unplanned. I was, as a child, fascinated by Thailand. I don't know why, or I didn't know why. And my parents certainly didn't, because we were a Toronto white family that ate boiled vegetables and potatoes and meat. There was nothing exotic about us. But for some reason, I was interested in Thailand, and I taught myself how to read the numbers in Thai, and I collected Thai coins and all that kid stuff. Why Thailand and not China? It's a huge place. No, Thailand for some reason. So finally, after decades of marriage, my wife, we traveled a lot. Finally, one day she said to me, we should go to Thailand. I know how much you are interested in it. So sure enough, we went to Thailand. We're walking around a variety of cities. We're walking through a lovely mid-country city called Chiang Mai, through a big tourist and farmers market. And my wife, who has no interest in anthroposophy, she's a good, well, she's passed now, but she was a very good Anglican, had no interest in even hearing the word karma. She gestured off to me, off to the right, and I followed her gesture, and I looked, and I couldn't move. I was rooted to the ground. We're walking through this market with stalls on both sides in every direction. I was rooted to the ground. I saw a man, a Thai man, with what looked like a toilet plunger attached to his chest, held to his chest, and a string, I think several strings on this toilet plunger, and he was playing it. It's an ancient Thai instrument called the pinpia. I couldn't move. I was so astounded to see that. I walked towards him and I asked him what it's called and what he could tell me about it. But as he was doing that, I had a picture of ancient Thailand, young men and young women, and the man playing this pinpia and the women all gathering around as if it was me. I have no musical ability in this life. My family are all wonderful musicians and I have none, but I did. I'm quite convinced now in Thailand. So since then I've played a bit with that incarnation and looked at it, but clearly I was a musician sometime in the past. Who knew? I'm a computer scientist this life. Play the piano? No, I play CDs. That's my musical ability. Okay, I'll give you another example. And this one is the one where anthroposophy saved my life. So I've been an anthroposophist for decades. I like to think that I'm open-minded, but I also only have so much time and attention for the world. So I'm watching TV one day and up comes this little news article about MVP study. Well, that's a cute name. Okay, I don't know what MVP stands for. It doesn't really interest me. I'm listening half while I'm doing something else. MVP study, but somehow it sticks in my mind. And so I don't think I was able to rewind back then. It was a few years ago. So I thought, well, why is this so interesting? It was in a hospital. There's an MVP study in a hospital. What's so important about MVP? I don't know. I don't care. But I did care. And so a few weeks later, I researched it on the internet and found Sunnybrook was about to start an MVP study. Oh, that's okay. That's the guy I saw. He was interviewed. He was the head of this study. Yeah, okay. Well, why do I care? I don't know. I don't care. I read a bit more. And by then I'm in my, I'm in the beginning of my 60s. So people around me are starting to fall. People around me are starting to become weaker. People are starting to have diseases that they may not recover from. A good friend of mine had the disease that this MVP study was all about, prostate cancer. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm the same age as my good friend and he's suffering quite a bit. And so maybe it's not so irrelevant. So I read about it a bit more. Sure enough, it's a prostate study in which two things can be done. It's a random study where they bring a whole bunch of people that have no symptoms and they want to test how effective the very expensive diagnostic tool is against the blood test. And so you'll randomly be assigned to one of those two, and then they'll follow you for a year and see if the very expensive test did any good. Oh yeah, it seems harmless. All they're going to do is take a little bit of my blood. I don't care. So I signed up for it because of my friend having this illness and others my age being told to pay attention. Off I went, flipped the coin. The doctor literally flipped a coin. And he said, "Oh, you're in the MRI side." I thought, "Oh, cool. I've never had an MRI. That'll be interesting." So I went into this big, expensive machine, went through the MRI. The guy after me may very well have had the blood test for $60. And so I went through an MRI and thought that's the end of it. But a month later, they called me and said, "You have to come in." That's never good. Doctor calls you and says you have to come in. It turned out I had very advanced prostate cancer. No symptoms. I would never have known this. But the MRI, even the blood test didn't show because my doctor did it every year or two. But sure enough, advanced prostate cancer. The MRI showed it. So of course I dealt with that, in my case surgery, and that was, I don't know, 5 years ago now. I've been cancer-free for 5 years. If I had waited till symptoms showed up, it would have been so advanced, it would have been through my body. But instead, I'm cured. So that was one of those moments when I heard something and something within me was telling me this is more important than it sounds. I continued following through with the hint. This is more important than it seems. And exactly what needed to happen to keep me alive happened. Within 3 months, the doctor was able to say, in the study, we did all the follow-up exams because the study's funded and you are the most cancer-free person in this hospital today. So that was a wonderful thing to have at that moment. I take it, because of my flexibility. Many people may have that kind of personality, many people don't. I didn't think I had that kind of personality. But if you listen, karma can talk to you. Your angels can talk to you. Clearly, that was an event in my life that must happen. And I must deal with it. And I was able to deal with it correctly. And so I'm looking forward to doing a few more talks, lectures, and teaching courses for the next few decades. Okay, there's an anecdote on how Anthroposophy saved my life. There is a book that I'll reference in which someone has done the research that Steiner describes to such a dedicated and disciplined extent that he was able to research his own karma back through previous lives, including all the way back through Lemuria. So he took lives all the way back through the recorded history and before. I've read it a couple of times now, I guess. It's a Norwegian man called Jostein Sæther, and the book is called Living with Invisible People, a karmic autobiography. I've read it a couple of times, and I'm pretty critical for fantasy and extrapolation and unsupported statements. And I don't think that Jostein Sæther is making any of these. So I commend that book to you. It's possible for someone to do what Steiner said and get results that are so extensive as recorded in this book. Now it's time for an exercise. There are exercises, or we could call them meditations, scattered throughout Steiner's decades of writing. And there are a group of them that we can consider to be karmic exercises, exercises that are particularly focused on making you more capable of recognizing your own karma and perhaps even your previous incarnations. And a man, let me just pull it open here. I don't think you'll see it, but I will. A man called, yeah, sure enough, while I'm talking, it disappears. Luigi Morelli came up with a collection of these karmic exercises. He did a wonderful job of pulling together Steiner's comments on each of these exercises. In some cases, he found the exercise mentioned in several lectures, and so he pulled it all together and asked and presented it back to us as a single exercise. Luigi Morelli also is one of the North America's experts on Platonists and Aristotelians. So the reference that I'll give you will allow you to pursue both of those. So I'm going to jump into karmic exercise 3 and ask you, after I've described it, to give it a try. So after I've described it, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and we'll talk about those questions. And then I'll break you into breakout groups and we'll take 10 minutes to discuss those. So first of all, here's the exercise. Karmic exercise, basic, lesser karmic exercise. So he has names for all of these. This is exercise 3 in the series. Exercise 1 was the gratitude exercise. The lesser karmic exercise consists of looking back to one single event in our life, one that is seemingly due to chance or to something that we did not wish to happen. Steiner spoke of this exercise in a number of places. One example that Steiner gave is of a person walking along the street and a shingle falling from the roof onto your head. In that example, he asks us to imagine the deed of the second person in us. That's the tricky part. Don't just see that shingle falling onto your head if it really happened to you, but imagine the deed of the second person in us who loosens the shingle just in time for it to fall on our head when we pass under it. As if there's another person who's orchestrating this event so that the event will happen. Picture that we have planned our lives before our birth in such a way as to come to certain critical turning points on earth. So the exercise again is just to pick a single event, one that is seemingly due to chance or to something we did not wish to happen. So you are clearly not in control. You're not in conscious control of this event. Now, it could be something really dramatic. You met your husband or wife. It could be something like I stepped back from the street before a car raced by. Those kind of events are dramatic. It could be any single event. And eventually, if you work with this enough, other events work quite well. A single event seemingly due to chance. Something happened to you. You didn't plan it. And perhaps you didn't even want it to happen. Imagine that a second person orchestrated that, caused it to happen, made it happen. You can even imagine seeing that second you doing whatever it is that happened that you didn't expect or didn't want. So let's jump into questions. Is that a clear enough, simple exercise? Anything you need to clarify there? Welcome back. As typical for any of my presentations, it's a bit catch as catch can, so we won't do a second exercise. The first exercise took up enough time. What I'd like to do is give you a quick description of what Steiner said that exercise done well and often enough can lead to. When we enter the exercise for the first few times, this second man is clearly seen as an invention, something artificially conjured up. However, he grows and evolves in us to the point that we cannot escape the feeling that he really is within us, accompanied with the growing realization that we have really wanted these events to come to pass. The memory of the fact that we have wanted these events has been all but erased from our consciousness, and the exercise repeated over many different life events serves to awaken it. We can thus deepen an inner conviction and feeling for our karmic biography. Cultivating this feeling bestows deep inner strength and modifies our attitude toward events we may have previously confronted with fear. We acquire a certain peacefulness and acceptance, together with the feeling that everything in our life has purpose. There's more that he has to say, but I will skip quickly forward to one more exercise, which we won't do, but I wanted to mention it. The next exercise in this sequence that Luigi Morelli has assembled for us, the attitude toward joy and happiness. If we had time, we could do this one. When the previous exercise has become an ingrained practice or changed our inner disposition, our attitude towards joy and happiness will change. This is a strange one. Although this step may not be easy, one will come through joy and happiness to feelings of thorough shame. And the only way to rid oneself of these feelings is to realize that we have not earned this happiness. The only solution is not to attribute our joys to the wiser being within us. A new feeling of peaceful serenity in the spirit and thankfulness toward the guiding powers of humanity arises. The human being, if the human being ascribes joy and happiness to his karma, if you think that you've earned your joy and happiness, he is succumbing to a fallacy which weakens and paralyzes the spiritual within him. A very strange perspective. Joy and happiness are not something we've earned. So there are a whole series of exercises, 7 of them, 8, and just checking. Yeah, there's 9 exercises that Morelli has assembled for us, all powerful, all demanding practice, like anything that we've heard from the beginning of the lecture when Rob did it 3 weeks ago. The first time through, you don't get the result. The 10th time through, you probably don't get the result. These are exercises that you become better at, like any physical exercise. One push-up doesn't make you strong. All right, I will leave those behind. I want to close before the questions with a really important quote from Steiner, especially for those of us that think of ourselves as anthroposophists. However, I've just filled my screen up. There we go. Okay, good. We can bring the quote up now. It's really important to me that you think about karma with this consideration as well. All this makes it necessary for the anthroposophist to pay heed to one condition of his karma, a condition that is sure to be present in him to a high degree. For the anthroposophist, this proverb must hold good. He must say to himself, now that I have become an anthroposophist through my karma, the impulses which have been able to draw me to anthroposophy require me to be attentive and alert. For somehow or somewhere, more or less deeply in my soul, there will emerge the necessity for me to find inner initiative in life. Initiative of soul, which will enable me to undertake something or to make some judgment or decision out of my own innermost being. Verily, this is written in the karma of every single anthroposophist. Be a person of initiative. And beware lest through hindrances of your own body or hindrances that otherwise come in your way, you do not find the center of your being, where is the source of your initiative. Observe that in your life, all joy and sorrow, all happiness and pain will depend on the finding or not finding of your own individual initiative. This should stand as though written in golden letters constantly before the soul of the anthroposophist. Initiative lies in his karma, and much of what meets him in this life will depend on the extent to which he can become willingly, actively conscious of it. A great modern writer, YBA, we mostly call him because his name is difficult. Raise your gaze to read in the golden letters what you have written before your birth in your karma. So now I'm happy to take questions.